Welcome back to Highly Respected. I'm your host, Scott Greer. We took yesterday off. I know I told everyone yesterday that I was going to have an episode for Memorial Day. We weren't going to take the day off, but it was so nice outside. And, I was like, everyone else is enjoying the nice weather. I should too. And so we're going to have it today on a normal work day where it is not a holiday. But with all that relaxation we've had over Memorial Day weekend, we're of course going to have a super incredible episode today. And most of what we're going to review is the busy news week we had last week. There was a lot of breaking news last week that we didn't get to cover because they all happened after Monday's episode. So we're going to go right into that with talking about the events from last week. I mean, the big news story we now have is Uvalde school shooting, which was the major event last week. It happened right after Highly Respected's episode, and it's now dominating the hot headlines and determining public discourse at this moment. So we're going to go right into that. I'm not going to belabor the details of this atrocity and tragedy that happened. I think most of the listeners should know this. So we're going to get into how this is affecting policy discussions and what it says about society. Now, I made this point in a tweet last week when everyone's suggesting their own ideas for what this is. And this always happens with every mass shooting, unless it is committed by a quote-unquote white supremacist or something. When it's committed by, as we saw in Buffalo, when it's committed by a white supremacist, the demands are we need to censor hate speech. We need to declare white supremacy the number one domestic terror threat. This is what we need to focus on. This is that. And generally, conservatives are on their back foot. Whenever there's a mass shooting, unless it's committed by a Muslim or another protected category, conservatives are on the back foot and determining what it is. But when it's a normal mass shooting, which is not really necessarily committed by a white person or it's unconnected from any type of political ideology, whether it's Islamic terrorism or white supremacy, they go into gun control and social factors into this. And I thought it was ridiculous when these people are saying, really what we need to do here is for the left is we need to ban assault rifles. We need expanded background checks. And they're just talking about this policy. And all these guys are having their big, meltdowns for the cameras. Chris Murphy is up there, talking to a senator who's talking about we got to get this done. God damn it. He's giving his lecture about how we need to get this done. And he's so disgusted with Washington, D.C. And then there's the Golden State Warriors coach, Kerr, who's going on about how he's tired of giving these discussions and rants. And it's you're a basketball coach. Maybe you should stop giving these rants on politics about how we need gun control. And it's the bill is just to expand background checks. And on the right, there are sometimes even dumber ideas. One is we need, armed guards. I mean, usually we do have armed guards or the school resource officers. And generally in a lot of these cases, they fail. At Parkland, the guy never even engaged the shooter. He stayed out in the parking lot. Everyone called him a coward. This case, the guy drove by, didn't engage him. There's a problem with police that we'll get into in a moment. But I want to first say is what this says about the issue. So they're that. So people are now going to just arming people. It's there's people, most people are saying arming teachers, which if you guys, conservatives have been highlighting these videos from libs of TikTok for months and months. And you're do you want these people to have guns? I don't. I don't want, I'm not one of those people, of course I'm pro-Second Amendment, pro-gun rights, but there are some people I'm I'm not really comfortable with these guys having guns. And it's some purple-haired teacher with a severe mental illness having a gun who's clearly hates her kids that she has to teach. And I'm maybe she shouldn't have a gun. The school shooter may be that teacher. You don't want that. You don't want the crazy people to necessarily have easy access to firearms and then to be able to threaten kids with it, disruptive kids or kids who are misgendering them. So I don't know. You may have some kids getting shot at for using the wrong pronouns. And also, if they actually faced a shooter, I don't think these people necessarily have the courage to confront the shooter. Even these cops who are trained for this didn't have the courage to it. But that is, I'll say, is for a moment. So armed teachers. Then it gets even more ridiculous. You have arming kids. I can't think of anything more horrific than 9-year-olds bringing firearms to school. People are all, I mean, like, once again, like, everyone's like, everyone should have a gun. It's like, no, 9-year-olds shouldn't be bringing guns to school. I mean, they can handle guns when their parents are around and go to the firing range, but, if you've ever interacted with kids, like, I mean, they would just start shooting each other or, misplacing their gun. I mean, these are people or kids are still like, refuse to blow their nose and will just pick their nose and do things like, do you expect them to practice proper gun safety? I don't think so. And it's like, what is a kid? It's like arming kids. They've got arming kids, and then they've got arming unemployed vets to man the schools is like, essentially finding people homeless on the street to guard schools. That's a little strange. I think that also might be creating. I don't know if that's the smartest idea. It gets even more fantasy. I mean, Scott Adams is also suggesting that we allow kids to kill bullies, and that's so ridiculous. And then he got mad at anyone who's like, this is the most ridiculous idea I've ever heard. He's like, maybe you're a fucking bully yourself. And it's like, Scott Adams is always guaranteed to say something incredibly stupid and then pretend it's the smartest thing ever. The Dilbert guy, I guess the vaccine really messed up with his brain and his much younger wife leaving him. But so these ideas are just like all ridiculous. And then there's just like, we only have one door in the entire school, and it's like, what if there's a fire? It's like everyone's crowding to that one door. That's like a massive fire hazard. And even like if I haven't been in a school in a long time, but even I have a memory of it. And it's like, if there's only one door, I mean, if any type of emergency, like you're gonna have most of the school wiped out if they're not by that near door. It's like there, and even with these like door safeties, like at the Uvalde elementary school, they like left the door open, didn't lock the doors, and there's like basic safety precautions that they didn't even handle. Even on the gun side, like this kid shouldn't have even been allowed to have guns. Is like he was openly committing animal abuse that should have like been, charged with a crime that would have prevented him from owning a weapon. And he's clearly had mental illness issues. Once again, they didn't go in there. And this always happens with these cases. It's generally somebody that if the rules had actually been enforced, this person wouldn't have a gun, but they didn't have it. I mean, there was this Texas shooter. I think this was all the way back in 2018 or 2017, where this guy who was like a Air Force vet, he shot up a church and killed over 20 people. And this guy got kicked out of the military for a crime. He committed a crime, and it would have barred him from owning a weapon. But this was never properly processed, and the dude was able to get weapons anyway. And this is in the same case, Nicholas Cruz shouldn't have been able to own weapons. He did, and the Parkland shooter, he did. And once again, it's usually that they create these rules and then they don't properly enforce them, especially if, a lot of times if they're minorities or even with mental illness. Our whole society is built on making sure that we don't exclude the mentally ill or protected categories from these things. And so if we made mental illness a category for barring firearm ownership, there'd be all these demands from civil rights groups that they shouldn't do that, and this is wrong. And really the only standard that anyone would agree with is having far right views. So any of these expanded background checks or restrictions or regulations would be used against people who already own guns or are right wing or conservative, and ensuring that they don't own weapons. But if you're an Antifa person with felonies, like the dude who got shot by Kyle Rittenhouse, you're going to be allowed to own a firearm. They're not going to care about you for owning a firearm. But if you're just a law-abiding citizen who likes pro-Trump stuff on Facebook, they'll definitely try to use that as a way to bar you from firearm ownership. So that's why we should always be opposed to these gun rights restrictions, because there would be a theoretical possibility where you could see gun rights, gun restrictions should be appropriate. If we had a proper country with proper bureaucracy that was not designed to ensure that law-abiding white Americans lost their privileges, while the people who have mental illness and criminal records and other things are likely to use it for crime or barred from gun ownership, but they're not due to our incompetent bureaucracy. But the only people who are going to follow these laws are, once again, law-abiding white citizens. and they're generally going to be the ones punished. Meanwhile, like the mentally ill criminal who's threatening to kill people is never going to be barred from owning guns, unless they're saying I'm going to kill people for a far right or racial reason. Then they may do it, or if they make a joke on Twitter. It's like those guys who there's a couple guys who are right wing Twitter posters who got their guns confiscated for making Joker jokes when the Joker movie was coming out. They'll use that reason, but once again, if you're issuing a detailed manifesto about how you're going to shoot up a school, they're surprisingly not going to do this. Not going to come after you. So I don't trust the bureaucracy to properly enforce these things, and it's not even going to solve the problem. So both sides are issuing ridiculous things, and the right, I understand why they're doing this, because they're wanting to just like suggest ideas and feel the need to suggest ideas, and they're wanting to oppose gun restrictions, and opposing gun restrictions is the right call. So they talk about things like, the proper response is just to say we need the things in place to be properly enforced. Like we have school resources officers. We need those guys to show that they'll engage these shooters and take them down immediately, rather than hiding out in the parking lot. We need to show that we will, like, if there's like people with problems and like displaying acts of violence, whether they're killing animals or showing that they want to shoot up a school, that they're ensured that they are, monitored, and that they are not able to buy a massive arsenal, and that we have rules in place that can be properly enforced that can prevent these things. And it's all about, reforming the bureaucracy, reforming the process we already have, and also being tougher on crime, because a lot of these things that are happening is by a more permissive culture being allowed by the left, especially when it comes to school discipline. Nicholas Cruz is like a proper example. Is that Broward County in Florida, they, by being recommended by Obama, they're all worried about the school to prison pipeline. So they stopped doing zero tolerance disciplinary policies that could have prevented Nicholas Cruz from becoming a mass shooter or from even owning an arsenal. But they didn't do this. They didn't take the proper precautions. They were easy on him. And then he, of course, later when, after school, I think he did this a year after his graduation, he was able then to do his massacre. And it's all because of this permissive culture that they allow people to misbehave and do criminal acts in school and in society with these teenagers. And now, they're able to do even worse crimes because they don't stop them when they're first acting up and displaying these behaviors that could turn into worse things, and trying to correct that. And so that is like one of the things that like could be pushed. And I think they just kind of turn to these ridiculous ideas as a waiting game, because eventually American interest in this case is gonna wither. I think it's already withering at this moment. And it's the same with the Buffalo shooting. I had predicted that it wouldn't, be a massive news story for much longer than a weekend. Sure enough, it only lasts a weekend. Then it was replaced by another mass shooting that took place in Uvalde. So, the public attention span is not going to be there for the whole time. And it's more of just a waiting game to just like deflect this and just ensure that there's not a huge public push for gun control, which I support, but then they're just suggesting ridiculous ideas. I think Populist Pundit, a great account, a really smart account. Really, I'm really glad that this guy exists. He suggested that we need to have armed priests. Clearly, as a joke, because all these right wingers are now talking about they blame everything on like demons now, which. I'm not disputing the existence of dark spirits, but I usually think there's like more physical reasons why a lot of these things are happening, but people just kind of do demons. It's like in some ways people do that as a cope from addressing like the real things that are happening. Like, if they see like black crime on a subway or like guys attacking the Asian, they'll just like, this is demons. I was like, I think there's a different type of people at work here, or a different type of group here. So people use that, and so it's like, I guess he's like in mocking of that. He's like, we need armed priests, who will combat who will engage in spiritual and physical warfare. But the thing is, like, he's offering that as a joke, but a lot of the serious ideas were more ridiculous than that, like arming kids and arming homeless vets and all this stuff is just ridiculous. And even just like having only one door at a school, a lot of this stuff is just there, but I mean, it's a part of a waiting game and just offering like any type of solutions they can in order to wait this out for the left and let the American public move on to other issues. That gets to my point about what is the ultimate cause of this and how ridiculous it is to expect that like these minor solutions will solve the problem. As I've said before, America is an insane asylum. Like, just think about how crazy of this country it is. And I'm always surprised that there's fortunately not more mass shootings. Like, we have so many crazy people, so many weirdos, just so many like isolated, alienated people in our country that I'm surprised there are not more mass shootings. And we've already seen people that are thankfully that like before they're actually carry out these school shootings, they're caught. Like a few days after the Uvalde school shooting, there was some kids in Texas who were planning to shoot up their school with AK-47s. Guys were also Hispanic, just like the Uvalde shooter. And so people are just like, why is this being caused? It's like, well, we just live in an insane asylum of a country. Like, our country is wacky, just like everything about it. There are so many things wrong in our country. It's not trying to blackball. Just sit back and think about our country for a moment. And just think about the amount of violence and crime we're having at this time. And we have mass shootings, as I've always said, we've had mass shootings all the time. But usually it's involving magic, and it's usually involving like a bar brawl or a fight at a party, and some guy gets mad and pulls out a gun and shoots like 20 people, all 20 people wounded. You can always tell like the kill count on whether somebody who's committing this mass shooting is by the kill count. If it's like 20 people wounded, we likely know who was behind this, and it's like people shooting at each other. Like, there's just last weekend there was a school mass shooting in Chattanooga, and it was in a nice part of Chattanooga. It was like downtown. It was not like a rough area, and it was like saying multiple groups were shooting at each other. And you're like, I wonder who was doing the shooting. And you have to understand that like this is just like a fact of life now. It's like anywhere in nightlife, no matter how nice of a part of downtown it is, it can immediately turn into a war zone due to some guy stepping on another shoe and be like, that's my fucking shoe. And then they like start shooting at each other, and then they don't of course don't hit each other, but then they hit like 15 pedestrians that are surrounding and sometimes kill them. There was like one I think that I brought this up in a recent episode, is like in Minneapolis, where a guy was shooting at these two guys were shooting at each other over a fight dispute at a bar, and one of the guys actually did kill the other, but in the process they wounded like over a dozen people, and one they killed like some white college kid in the process. And this is like not necessarily a rough part of Minneapolis where this happened, and this is just a factor in life. And when these things happen, we just say, oh well, that's life, And even with the Sacramento shooting, which this basketball coach Kerr went after, and it's like, we need gun control after this. They eventually realized who was doing the shooting, and then they're like, yeah, this is just what happens in a standard urban life. And once again, it was multiple groups shooting at each other over a gang dispute or a bar brawl, and that's usually what happens at the shooting. And it's just like an insane factor in America. Just like I talked to some Europeans. Of course, we have our European friends of highly respected. And it's just like, this is such an insane country where this is like a fact in life that you just have like these mass shootings left and right. Even though there is like saying, it's like, I've seen the data, and it's like showing that like some European countries who have much stricter gun laws have a higher per capita death toll from these mass shootings. I would have to see what they count as mass shootings. I guarantee you that it's like not counting these mass shootings that are what we're seeing in downtowns on a weeknight basis, where it's like, not many people die from. There used to be this category that a lot of these news media proclaimed, which was to deny like drive-by shootings and things connected to criminal activity in the mass shooting category, so they get their ideal mass shooter type, which was, they of course wanted it to be some angry white male. And usually the standard was like at least 4 killed, at least I think it was 3 or 4 killed, not connected to any previous crime, so it like can't count as like a bank robbery gone wrong, or a bar dispute of someone stepping onto each other's shoe or a drive-by shooting. So that would eliminate most of them. And it's like, and carried out by one shooter as well. And that would also eliminate some of these mass shootings we see in these disputes, because a lot of times it's multiple shooters shooting at each other. So that's like how it is. But like the data shows that like it just reduced that category. Is like some countries have like a higher death toll per capita than us. Like they point out Norway and France. But I think the Norway thing was all Anders Breivik, killing 77 people all the way back in 2011. That makes them have a higher per capita mass shooting than us, and our death toll than us. And so was like France, but France had the Bataclan shooting where over 100 people were murdered. And so maybe that makes the difference in between America and us. And they also use a very narrow category for mass shootings. But regardless, I think it's just looking at this country, and it's like we're having crime go up, we're having violence go up. A lot of people got, their psyches got really wrecked by COVID, and just other factors that were apparent even before COVID and the lockdowns. And now these are just getting worse. And so we have all these like weirdo kids or mentally ill people who, there's no real meaning or purpose in their life. There's a ease of access to firearms, and clearly, even if they're supposed to be banned from getting guns, they can clearly get guns, as a lot of these mass shooters show. In pretty much every case, this person shouldn't even, under the normal rules, they shouldn't have even been allowed to have a gun, but then they got a gun somehow, and then they commit acts of violence. So it's just like we live in we live in an insane asylum. Like this is like a country that's filled with numerous problems that, these are isolated individuals, and they'll want to kill people no matter, even if they were barred from having guns. You could see these guys like, take a car and drive through a crowd of people, or, maybe they'll just like turn into a serial killer. The one thing we do have is like different from years past is like we do have fewer serial killers, which maybe the development of technology and the way society works is that we have maybe fewer runaways. It's harder to drop off society. So, and serial killers in the 70s and 80s generally preyed on people that people would forget or not care about if they were gone. And they didn't have like cell phones and stuff, or people alerting to where they were, or all this mass surveillance. So it was much easier to go undetected back in the 70s and 80s. And there was like the height of serial killers back then. So that's one thing we don't have, but now we have more mass shooters of this type, and just people wanting to emulate, Nicholas Cruz or whoever. And so these are like the factors going in. If we're always wanting to put a policy prescription on how our country operates, and it's like, expanded background checks is not going to stop these people. It isn't going to like somehow, it's like, oh, I can't buy a gun, I guess I'm going to be a normal citizen now. I'm going to join the social institutions that are around. Oh yeah, I'm gonna become a stable person now. This is how my life's going to work out, and this is just how it is. It's like, that's not going to happen. These are still going to be isolated weirdos who no real connections to their community, no real connection to their family. They're just kind of like there existing in society. And it's not like they're going to be given a meaning and purpose by like armed teachers. And so they'll find a way to kill and hurt people no matter what. And that drive's still going to be there. And that also goes to another thing conservatives try to solve with this. I find this primarily conservative, even though it's bipartisan thing. I see some liberals claiming this, is that when these school shooters happen, we should just not show their name at all. Like, we have to disappear their name. Like, we're going to act like, an invisible force killed these people. Now, I understand, like, where it comes from. It's like, we don't want to give these people publicity and the fame that they seek. And some of these guys, like, want that for all the publicity and fame they seek. There is a point to that, but it's also like, it's a news story. We're supposed to know who the hell these people are. And they already try to use this when it's like the shooter, it goes against type of what the mass media wants to show as the shooter. If it's like not an angry white male or some white male with maybe a political agenda, the media is happy to not talk about this person or say their name. It's like, we don't know who did it. We're gonna say that no shooter here, and they would love to do this with Islamic terrorism. It's like, we're not gonna give them the fame that they want. And it's like, who is the shooter? He was just a person that we're just not gonna name or give any identifying details about that. They would love to do that about shooters who come from protected categories and want to pretend that they never commit mass shootings. So most of these shootings that involve like downtown gang violence, like they would love to say, we're not going to publicize these people because they're wanting to get fame. And it's like, no, you're clearly doing this to hide the color of crime and who's doing the shootings. And so they would already do that to a great extent now when the crimes, they will, but if the person turns out to be a white male, they'll of course show that person's mugshot everywhere and talk about this person's name and say this is the most dangerous threat to America right now. And conservatives play their hand into it. I think it's like, Daily Wire not publishing their name is not going to convince like mass shooters to stop. It's like, shit, I was thinking about killing people and harming people because like I'm a deranged person, but I saw on Daily Wire they didn't mention the last school shooter. Well, I'm totally changed my mind. I'm not gonna commit acts of violence now. And I don't think that's like the case. And it's just like denying the news story. It's like it's a type of censorship that's there that the media would happily love to do this about any crime. They're like, some dude stabbed someone to death in a robbery, and that person happens to be black. They would love to say, like, we're not going to publish this person's name because we don't want to give them the attention that they desire. It's like, I don't think they stabbed someone to death for, to get on the news media. They did that to, like, steal a purse or whatever. So they would love to do this as now, and they're already doing this like by not showing mugshots. A lot of police departments and local news media outlets now agree to never show mugshots because it's racist to do that. They don't establish identifying details of suspects because it's racist to do that. So this is already part of it, and there's like I understand it's coming from a well-meaning spot that they want to do this, but it'll be used for horrible purposes that they're gonna. It's just to hide facts that they don't want to acknowledge. And it's like a news story. You're supposed to know this person. Maybe there could be a limit to that person, but completely hiding this person and pretending it's like a invisible force that did this, it doesn't really solve the problem. Like, people want to know who the shooter is. Maybe you don't show their mugshot, you just give their name in that, because I guarantee you that if the shooter conforms to the type that the mainstream media wants to do, they're not going to have any qualms about showing this person off. So... But if it plays against the type that they want to show as the typical mass shooter, they're of course gonna go to this Ben Shapiro argument. Like, we're not gonna highlight this mass shooter to prevent future mass shooters. Like, no, you're just trying to hide certain details about that. And they would do that in the Uvalde. I keep pronouncing this town's name wrong. I'm sorry to the people of Uvalde, but they do that. But they would love to do this with Salvador Ramos. That the guy, they're like, oh, no, we'll say it was an Anglo, a white guy who did this. They would love to pretend it was that rather than facing up that it was like a fellow Hispanic killing other Hispanics in the school. I mean, the grim fact we have to face, and this is a conclusion to this, is that it's just like mass shootings are a part and parcel of American life. And that's a really depressing thought. But that is like our society and culture now. And we'd have to completely revolutionize how America operates in order to achieve this. And you have to think, it's like, we already have a massive surveillance state operating in this country. Like, and to a degree that in the 70s and 80s was unthinkable. Because as I was saying before, it's like a lot of the serial killers were able to operate and obtain like dozens of victims due to the fact that there wasn't necessarily a surveillance state there was. I mean, we didn't have smartphones. We didn't have like a camera on every street corner. There was like a ton of people that, it was easy for them to disappear, and just people were like, I guess they, ran away or whatever. And like a ton of people would just like forget these people existed. And now with the surveillance state, I think that makes it a lot harder for serial killers to operate. And some other changes as well that makes it serial killers harder to operate. But and not only school shooters, and even with the massive surveillance state that we have, and just monitoring of social media, where a lot of these guys, like, social media posts are reported to the authorities, but the authorities don't properly follow it up because there's now a much more permissive attitude towards crime in this country, that we don't want to punish these people. We want to avoid the school to prison pipeline. We want to give these kids a second chance, especially if they come from a protected category. And it allows these things to take place. And there's like a greater degree of loneliness and atomization in our society. It's not like these kids, they may have some family that they have, but, they don't really know them. I mean, this Ramos guy was being raised by his grandmother. His parents weren't around. Like, like what do these people have to live for? And you're just going to have all these types in our society roaming around. And we no longer have, we no longer really have insane asylums. We don't commit people there, because that's the wrong thing to do. That's not a very progressive thing to do, and we don't like punish kids who are acting up, who are acting violent in school, because we don't want to be racist. We don't want to, we want to get them second chances, and now they're able to skip school, commit carjackings, or even plan school shootings and other things. And a lot of times that these kids commit crimes outside of school, they're going to get a slap on the wrist. If that, maybe they might not even get a slap on the wrist, as there was shown where this 16-year-old rapper shot a cop when he was struggling with him in a fight. And the guy, they dropped the charges against him, even though he had already had a violation. He was not supposed to have a firearm against him. So, if you come from a protected category, they're going to let you do whatever you want. So there's this permissive attitude. And now we just think that we'll put a policy prescription here. And it's like, these policy prescriptions aren't even going to be followed. The only people going to follow them are law-abiding white citizens, or just law-abiding citizens in general, who are no threat from mass shooters, but are no threat to become mass shooters, but they follow the law, and they're going to be the ones who are, giving up their guns, or, following along and not buying guns because the government told them they couldn't because they shared an offensive post on social media. And that's how these things are going to be happen. So, yeah, this is like, when you're looking at these school shootings and you're upset by it, it's like, this is what America is. This is what America exists as now. And we're going to have more of these things happen over time, and we're probably not going to solve them. We're never going to go to the type of extensive gun restrictions that Australia has or elsewhere that may put a dent in these school shootings. But I feel like these people just find other ways to try to kill people, as well as we see in some places in Asia where there's mass stabbings and stuff, and people have cars, so they'll just drive into crowds. So there's other ways to harm people in a mass casualty event besides guns, as we saw in the Waukesha anti-white attack on that Christmas parade. So if these guys can't use guns, they'll likely use something else. And so there's something deeply sick in our society, and I think it's going to get. And I think COVID made this a lot worse. I think it's just society in general, and it's sad. I mean, it's unfortunate, but the only way we can really change this is a radical change in American society and how it operates. And thinking that we can exist as a society we are, and everything can be hunky-dory. And maybe if we just tell people that they should find a meaning and purpose, that they will. I don't think it's going to happen. We're a very absent-minded country when it comes to kids and assimilating people into what we are. And by assimilate, not necessarily immigrants, it's just assimilating people into normal society, getting them in there. I just don't think that's be the case. And so it is unfortunate that this is the way we're going to have to live, but this is life in the insane asylum. And there's the only escape is victory, as I always like to say. And this is the only way you can change things. And so, I mean, your only choices are, expansion of the mass surveillance state, which, once again, these people are catching these guys beforehand, or they're on the radar. People report them, but they choose not to follow it up because we have an incompetent bureaucracy. And so that's usually not going to work. You can try to gun ban, which generally restricts the rights of law-abiding citizens to defend themselves, all to stop these crazy people who will then just turn to other means to kill mass amounts of people. Or you can arm kids and witness kids shooting each other, or just accidentally shooting themselves over this. So it's just all ridiculous. And people just, it's not a politically popular thing to just say, this is what America's like, and we really can't do anything about it. There's no policy prescription. People don't want to hear that. They will always want to have a solution. But it really is a natural disaster that happens. And the left treats a lot of crimes as natural disasters that actually could have an impact. Like a guy let out on bail goes and murders somebody. Well, there's something that could be changed about that. But the left is oh, it's a natural disaster. How does this happen? And they like to treat terror attacks as natural disasters. And when even with the Waukesha thing, it's car itself, it became it came to life and ran over people, or it's several people die in a car wreck. It's like, I think there was somebody behind the car, behind the wheel. The car didn't kill these people, but they always use that as like an accidental way. But when it comes to school shooters, unfortunately, it's now just like kind of a natural cause. It's like a storm, not necessarily natural cause, but like a storm that just like happens. It's like a tornado comes through, and there's still more you can do against a school shooter than a tornado. I mean, that has always been the way of nature. But as American society exists, like, we are a school shooter culture, and it really is going to get worse. I think, as it really is. I mean, with the Zoomers, like, it's even more atomization, more people getting lost, and it's the same with all these kids like wanting to change their gender and stuff. I mean, this is all part of it, and so some of these kids, instead of changing their gender, are just going to want to kill their fellow classmates, and so it's a very disturbing thing. But it's not the popular thing you want to do, but it is. I'm not a politician, so I'm able to say what I feel the situation is like, and there's not really much you can do. It's just something that it requires much larger changes to actually handle, but people don't want to go there. They just want to ban guns or these knee-jerk responses. They want something immediate that's probably not going to stop the next school shooter or mass casualty event. So that's it. The one thing I'm worried about that's going to happen from this is that I'm seeing this for both the right and the left, is not that gun control is going to be passed, but more support for anti-police measures is going to be passed due to the incompetence and inaction of the police in Uvalde. I'm going to get the name right eventually. Uvalde. Where the police stood around for at least an hour and didn't attack the shooter, and they prevented other people from going in. I would have always said this: police are not perfect. Police make a lot of mistakes, such as this, as not actually charging in, or not really allowing the Border Patrol tactical team to go in, which is what they should have, or allowed them to go in earlier. I mean, this is a fault of theirs, and this is more down to the police chief who ordered the people to stand down. And now people seeing this situation, which once again, it was law enforcement that took down this guy. I mean, it's Border Patrol that took him down. That is law enforcement. It's still law enforcement who took him down. It wasn't necessarily just even though the guy was off duty, who had just responded to the call, got a shotgun. He put on his vest, but he was acting as law enforcement at the time. He had been off duty getting his hair cut when he got the call, but he's called into action, and he operated with, I believe, with fellow members of a Border Patrol tactical unit who went in with him and provided backup, and they loaded up the shooter with a lot of lead. And so the good guy saved the day. But it was, once again, law enforcement. And so now the thing is, in face of school shooters, we needed to fund the police, so there will be fewer people to actually confront the shooter. Now, the left doesn't solve any problems. I mean, they want a hard police state to go and take people's weapons away, but then they want to abolish police at the same time. I don't know how that works. And also, there's going to be nobody to defend against the shooter, because nobody's going to be armed at the school. There's going to be no guards. We used the police in our last gasp to confiscate all this weaponry. There's no more police anymore, but somehow without police and without guns, we'll have fewer school shootings. Now with the right, they imagine that just without police in general, there'd be fewer school shootings, which I don't know how that's the case. And they side with the parents. The one thing I don't defend the police not going in and just staying there, but I can understand the reason why they're trying to prevent parents from going in. One, the parents aren't armed. This shooter had already massacred these kids, and so they don't have any weapons. I mean, they're just going to barge in and become casualties themselves. I mean, maybe if they're armed or if they're willing to take this guy on, but that's the chance they want to make. I mean, think about the trained Border Patrol Special Forces guy who went in. He nearly died. I mean, that bullet grazed the top of his head. If it just an inch, even less than an inch, that guy would be dead right now. But luck was on his side, and he was able to take down the guy before he and the guys who followed up into the room also were able to take him down. These guys aren't trained; they're just going to charge in and get mowed down. And now the police is responsible. Now instead of the police being blamed for holding these people back, the police are going to be blamed for not holding them back and allowing them to get wiped out by the shooter. So I understand in that situation. I mean, yeah, the police should have been more active. Now when it comes to the shooter, I don't defend that behavior, and I also don't defend necessarily them arresting them. You know, they should have been nicer, just making sure they're not entering the school so there's not more casualties. But that's what they have to do. They're trying to prevent casualties, and they clearly see like there's like if they allow a parent's charge, and there could be like a 20 more casualties, and it's going to once again be the police's fault and be a reason why we needed to fund the police. It's like, why did you let all these parents get themselves killed? It's like, well, this is what happens. I mean, really, but they should have listened to the parents' concern and actually gone in and charged them in, so there would have been no need to prevent the parents from going in because they would have already taken out the shooter much sooner, and parents wouldn't have even thought to have even gone in. So that's one thing to come in. But now both sides are just like, we don't need a police. Or it's like the police are there and they're like talking about how we need to end qualified immunity so they can't do their job at all. So they really can't shoot anybody. I mean, theoretically, if they end qualified immunity, this guy's family could sue police for using excessive force by that. I mean, maybe that might get thrown out, but there's other cases where it wouldn't be thrown out. Less ridiculous. I mean, that's like the type of thing. And people just like have this knee-jerk reaction to anything that like, we don't need police and citizens can solve this. I mean, think about this. Most citizens are not trained to, in these type of riot situations or hostage situations or active shooter situations. They might have a gun. Maybe they have a lot of courage. But they're not going to be trained to do this. They're going to not operate in how they want to be. I mean, this takes time and practice to learn how it is. That's why that Border Patrol Tactical Squad, which has done this in real life and done this against very dangerous people from cartels and human smugglers and other types, and they're trained. This is their job. They went in and they did a masterful job of taking this guy out, and that's why they should have been allowed in sooner. This is their profession. And people just think it's like some dude with a gun could just, maybe not even that much training, just like take down like 30 bad guys by just declaring himself a good guy. And there's too much of that, like where people just like on Twitter just think that like, a Joe Schmo citizen can just go on and by declaring himself the good guy is going to just do like heroic activities. I mean, maybe he can. I mean, there are a few cases of that, but it's not usually the norm. You generally need people where it's their job, they're trained, they've experienced these situations, and they do the thing that's right, as seen with the Border Patrol. And I don't know what's supposed to be accomplished by just like having fewer people out there to stop bad guys. Like there is not like the left is fine with this because then it's like all becomes federalized and then they can remake police in their own image and it's like all becomes under federal jurisdiction. They actually have a plan. The right has no plan. The right has no alternative to police. And I'm already going to hear these people like, oh, we'll have base militias. And it's like, there are no base militias to form to do this stuff, okay? And it's like, and eventually those people are going to be turned into police. It's like, oh, we don't have enough time to police this thing. Okay, well, you're going to be full-time, you're going to have a uniform, and the city's going to pay you, and we've just replaced police with police that. And generally, so we're going to have part-time police is your solution to this idea, and same type of people as police before. I don't know what's going to be different, or even that there's not going to be qualified immunity for these guys. So as like private citizens and vigilantes, and the state comes down hard on vigilantes, as we saw with the Ahmaud Arbery case. As like these guys were trying to police their neighborhood. What happened to them? I think we all know what happened to them. And it's the same with the Jonathan Pentland case, where this guy just confronted a dude, army sergeant confronted a dude who's harassing people in his neighborhood. He had his life ruined over that and got charged and convicted of a crime for merely just going up and yelling at a guy who's harassing people in his neighborhood. And people will be like, well, without cops, they wouldn't be arrested in the first place. So it was like, okay. So people just like go onto a fantasy where they just kept adding on into effects. And then they'll be like, well, we'll have private run police. So it's like, well, we already have private run police. And it's like, they're generally going to protect the people who are paying them. So they're going to be protecting billionaires. It's like, well, not the humans come together and then start paying them. It's like, so you're like a town and you have a town council and then you pay them. And once again, you're just recreating police. And so people are just like have this knee-jerk reaction to police. Most people have like some story about interact with an asshole cop. I do. Most people do. And so they kind of base it around like, I hate these assholes. Let's get rid of them. We don't need them. And then, when we don't have them, we have complete anarchy and chaos. And being an asshole is part of their job. If they were all just nice and friendly, no one would listen to them. Like, look at British cops, like these guys who are just like, please, walk on the sidewalk. And whenever they try to take down a dangerous criminal, it's like 5 of them getting thrown around by an African immigrant. It's like that's like the type of police where you have where they're still assholes too, but they're not really intimidating. So people just have these just hate cops. And we go into this, and there's like no alternative. And when people just like talk about it, it's like total fantasy. It's like citizens can police themselves. Like, no, they can't. Like, it's not their job. Like, people are doing other things. Like, they have a normal job. They have all their activities. They're not going to just like come home from work and it's like, time to patrol the neighborhood free of charge after coming home from work. And it's like, why are they going to do this? They're not getting paid for this. And it's like, well, they're just like a citizen's right. Okay. And generally, a lot of the policing activity is going to come down to people who are already capable of committing violence and have firepower. So you're just going to allow, in some cities, it's going to be gangs are going to take over the policing without police. And so it's like, a lot of times the right is just too much into fantasy, and rather than looking at the world as how it operates and like practical solutions. And with these police, like, I'm not defending how the police acted here, but once again, law enforcement still took them down. It was just Border Patrol, still law enforcement. And so people just like go into this and it's like, we got to be anti-cop. And like people always think it's like a brilliant 4D chess move to be anti-cop. And it's like, once we get beyond, once we're anti-cop and start removing police, then we'll get real solutions. And people think it's like going to be the base militia is just going to take over without police force. It's like, no, they don't exist. Like, we already have like armed groups around in our country, and you don't want to be ruled by gangs and or Antifa groups, which are allowed there. You're not abolishing, there's no plans to abolish the federal law enforcement, which should be more of a focus. And by federal law enforcement, I mean mainly FBI and ATF and stuff, not the Border Patrol and ICE. And that's like what people want to think. It's like, oh, well, once we get rid of this stuff, it'll be all hunky-dory. We'll all have anarcho-capitalist Batman to protect us. And it's like, go into just like total fantasy, and too much of our side is just like fantasy. But I'm worried that this is like going to become the solution, because now every Republican and Democrat is like upset at police, and they're like, we're going to rethink qualified immunity. So to make it harder for seeing police not doing their job, we're now going to make it harder for police to do their job as just like a way of punishing them. And then we think that this like eliminating qualified immunity is not going to stop any school shootings. It's just going to make school shootings more likely to happen, make them more cowardly in operating in this manner. And, school resource officers not going to confront somebody if they have a gun, if they know they're going to be sued and have their life ruined over shooting this person. It's like, oh, he's just having a mental episode with an AK-47 in his hand. Yeah, okay, that's what's going to happen. So all of you guys, the frequent listeners, know that I'm pro-police, and I always get very sick of this anti-cop stuff. And people use this for any example, and then they're just like, and a lot of these right-wing posters just like, this is a major turning point, like, defend police now. It's like, defend police. And all these people just like are bitter and angry over just like a cop like taking their weed from them in high school, and they're just like overgrown children when it comes to police. It's like no rational thinking happens, and they just have this fantasy image of themselves as like, without cops, I could kick this guy's ass. And it's like, probably not, but okay. Good luck to your situation, and we'll have more crime here. And even if there was more crime, and I was like arguing with these people, is like, and there's no police around, they'd still claim the real solution to crime is like fewer cops. It's just like a juvenile teenage rebellion here that's not really predicated on any serious logical thinking. But unfortunately, it is seeping into the mainstream conservatism, and it's definitely coming to the fore after this topic, where we saw a failure of these guys to actually do anything, and they didn't do anything. And so the solution is to ensure that nobody is able to do anything except for anarcho-capitalist Batman, who's going to fly through the window and take a ton of bullets like in the movie and be unharmed by it, and then kick this guy's ass. And people seriously believe this is their solution. So I think we do need a more practical, more logical, more reasonable thing. And we do need cops. We need more support for them. But I mean, it really does have to change a society where they feel comfortable shooting people who are armed and knowing they're not going to be sued or charged with a crime for doing so. And thankfully, qualified immunity is there. But people are idiots and just want to have a knee-jerk reaction to this and satisfy their own grudges and resentment against law enforcement rather than actually offering serious solutions. So we're pro-police, but I am worried that like any situation like this happens, it just encourages this. And once again, you have to realize is like this is the left wing. You're not helping your own cause. You're helping the left. There is no bill or plan to eliminate federal law enforcement. There is no bill or plan to replace cops with either base militias or base private police who are going to be more willing to shoot dead criminals and stuff. And there's no plans for that. All you have is that you place local law enforcement under greater federal control and greater like federal demands for diversity and quota and racial quotas, even when it comes to arrests. And that's what they want for all law enforcement, and it would only make them worse and make it easier for dangerous criminals to harm innocent civilians. And so you're just falling for the left's trap because you're upset a cop took your weed when you were 16 years old. Don't fall for that trap. And now I'm going to move on to the cognitive elite questions. Our one question today is more of a statement that I want to read out and I'm going to discuss it, but you can also do that. But as a reminder, you too can get the power to ask me questions or suggest guests and topics if you sign up for the cognitive elite option at Highly Respected's Substack, and that's at highlyrespected.substack.com. And this first question comes from Tim, and this kind of dovetails with a lot of what I said. And he was asking about this is also based on a tweet. I love people asking about tweets. And he was asking about why there was this famous clip, it was our viral clip that went around about this black schizo, homeless guy who's hopped up on drugs, like harassing people on the subway. And he eventually was, pulling a woman's hair, and you would say that's assault. And I said that and a lot of people were saying that somebody should intervene. And I said, that it's understandable why no one intervened. And Tim was asking, like, why is that your position to explain that? So I'll get into that explaining. So why shouldn't you interfere in this situation? Now, I think it would be a very different situation if this is a friend, a relative, your girlfriend, wife. Very different situation in that regard. But this is a complete stranger. And once again, her life is not necessarily in danger. She's getting, it is like a scary situation with a crackhead, a schizo who is in this. But you've always been told don't fight crackheads. This guy, crackheads are dangerous. They have extra, strength and energy by hopped up on whatever drugs there are. And clearly this guy has a shit ton of aggression. He's also fairly nimble and athletic for being a homeless person. Probably knows how to fight. And he's kicking his windows and stuff and being hyped up. Now, unless you are very trained in MMA and also know how to disarm somebody who may have a knife because he's homeless, likely has some sort of weapon on him, I would probably not recommend doing this. Now, if you're a really trained fighter, you know what you're doing, you're a pretty intimidating guy, and you know you can take him on, yeah, go up and say, hey, lay your hands off her. Now, this may be the situation. He can lay his hands off her, you attack him, and it's evil white racist attacks innocent black man who's having a mental health episode. You attack him, you beat him up. Maybe in New York City subway, you may be turned into the villain here. And the victim may say, I can't believe this racist attacked this innocent black guy, even though she's mouthing please help me. It's not like this roastie is going to have much loyalty to you. So you are going to risk your life for some roasty stranger who you don't know. And once again, this, you don't know what's going to happen. And unless you are pretty skilled in martial arts or in some way, or have long experience of fighting, physically fit, you feel that you can take on a crackhead. Not a lot of people can. You probably are. If you feel like you can tell him to, act up or whatever. And some people are saying all he needed is a stern talking to. Is lay your filthy hands off her. And it's crackheads be a moment of clarity. He's oh my God. I'm sorry, boomer. Please don't hurt me. It's lay your hands off her. Learn some respect. And the guy's just oh, I'm so sorry. It's this person's not going to have any moment of clarity. If the person's clearly trying to stir up a fight because he's like hopped up on whatever, he's aggressive, he's wanting to fight somebody, possibly even kill somebody, and he's hoping that like by doing this that he'll get like a potential victim there. Now, if you feel like you can take him on, so if you approach him and say yell at him, he's likely going to attack you. And in that situation, are you going to be, unless you're very skilled in training, it's not going to end up well for you. There's a lot of situations. I mean, it's like this. I mean, first off, this guy knows how to fight. He's much more aggressive than you. He's hopped up and he's wanting to look for a fight. May have a weapon on you. May looking to try to stab. It is what it is. Now, it's like everyone's turning on the other way. Now, if you're in a group of people, say you had another friend and two other friends, you guys are physically fit. You guys know you can tackle them and hold them down and, ensure that nothing happens. Then but it's like you going up to an individual. Like, I think this is like a situation that's like it's like boomers who are just like LARPing online and think that they can just take on anybody because like, put up your Duke, son. And then like, they'll give him a lesson he should have learned back in 1965 or whenever they were growing up. And they think that's going to happen. And they'll like, that may be the case. But now even if you guys like are surviving the fight and not getting harmed and like stabbed or whatever, get the shit kicked out of you by just simply telling him to stop, then maybe you should do that in a situation. There's the potential that this is New York City and they say that this is a hate crime by you guys attacking an innocent black man who's having a mental health episode. So you have to deal with that. That's like the way the situation works. And it's like this happened, as I said, I brought this up in the Jonathan Pentland case. This is a guy that even on a train you probably would want. He is a drill sergeant. He's an intimidating guy. He's a posing guy. He works out. He's like physically fit. He is, it's his job to scare the shit out of recruits and to like get them to follow orders. This guy would probably be your ideal to go up and say, hey, stop that. And maybe he would know what to do in that situation. Maybe not. I mean, he's still, even like all your muscles in fighting training, if a knife gets into you, all bets are off on what happens. And that guy simply went up to a guy who was harassing neighbors and assault and like trying to steal kids from the neighborhood and just being a menace to his neighborhood. And he simply went up, and this is South Carolina, not New York City. He simply went up, yelled at the guy, lightly shoved him, and basically established that like, you're not going to do shit in my neighborhood. What happened to him for being a good Samaritan? Well, he got arrested. He got charged with assault. He got his house attacked by a mob where they were throwing rocks through the window. He got turned into Mr. Evil Racist of the country. And this happened in South Carolina and it's like clearly defensible case. And it was like similar thing here. It's like this guy's harassing people. The difference is this guy that he went up to was less physically threatening than the other guy. And it looked like he was less hopped up on drugs. The guy on the subway looked like a much more guy that you'd have to worry about getting into a fight with. The kid he went up to in the South Carolina neighborhood, I don't think you would have not had to worry about that kid. I don't think, especially if you didn't have a weapon on him, so you wouldn't have to worry about that. But in this case, all he did was like yell at him and shoved him. And he got into a heap of trouble. Now imagine you just like beating the shit out of a black guy in a subway, and he's like having a mental health episode. You'd be turned into the villain there. So this is like a crime thing. And it's just like the practical like fighting measure. It's like a lot of people on just like Twitter just like think that like just by like saying it that they can charge in and have a lot of courage. It's like the same with like the shooter. It's like they think that like they can just charge in unarmed and take down the shooter. Like bullets will just like will avoid them because, bullets only hit people who have seed oils in them or whatever new right-wing meme they have. And they'll just like charge in and take this guy down. And it's like most people don't have that much courage. Most people don't have that type of fighting skill to that. So that's like the thing with that. I think. And when people turn the other way, is like we've been trained to turn the other way. It's not how we should operate as a society. What an ideal society, you would say, you would see this situation. You would say, look at other guys around you who are physically fit. You guys would get up, like three or four of you, and you would just go, tackle that guy, hold him down, and just like say, don't do this. Wait for police to come and arrest him. That would be it. But that's not, you're likely going to look around. You're not going to see anyone joining in. It's just going to be you. And maybe you can take him on. Maybe you can't. But so the two situations is this guy fucks you up, potentially kills you, or you fuck him up and they record it and then you become the bad guy because you're a white guy, and say you have a right-wing posting history, then you're definitely going to be the one charged for assaulting an innocent black person. And this is how this is like our crazy country that we live in. So everyone just like thinks that it's like boomers. Maybe we just like need boomers online to help us. And there's also this stuff. It's like he attacked a woman. Like, how dare he? It's like this is a woman's honor. It's like they imagine we're like medieval knights and this is like chivalry and every woman's like a perfect angel. It's like, no, this woman, like, no, she shouldn't be assaulted. But it's like, I don't think this is like a perfect little angel. And also, we're in a society that tells women that they're big and strong and they can kick guys' asses all the time. If you ever watch a movie, you'll see a woman who's about that size kicking like a dozen guys' ass at the same time. Like, I mean, you watch Black Widow or Wonder Woman, this is what the message is. And society keeps telling them, like, women don't need men to defend them. They can defend themselves. Well, why did the woman defend herself? Like, why didn't she do anything? And then, like, clearly, we all know the answer, but, like, society tells them that they can just defend themselves. But in these situations, they can't. They rely on men to do this. Whether the situation is the right call, it is there. I mean, it did remind me of the situation that happened in Washington, D.C. 7 years ago. This is summer 2015, where this Democratic staffer, I think he worked for an office or one of the think tanks, he was like on a train. This is in the middle of the day. There's some black kid who's hopped up on drugs, like stole his phone. And the guy's like, give it back to me. And this kid walloped this guy, like threw him down, body slammed him, and then stabbed him to death as like the guy's screaming. And the whole train was like stunned by this. And it's middle of the day. There was like, I think there was like 6 or so other passengers on besides the perp and the victim. And then he went up and like robbed them and stuff, and that's it. Now a lot of people condemn this. I remember writing a column condemning this and like showing this like people don't want to intervene, and this like shows a decline in society. Wrote this for the highly esteemed Daily Caller, and that. But now looking back, I think most of the people on the train were not like able-bodied. I remember there was like an elderly couple that he like robbed, and I was like, they're not going to get in this. And this guy has like a knife. And unless, so once again, you have to be like 3 or 4 people to go and like tackle this guy and ensure that like nothing bad happens. I think in that case, maybe you should have risked, because that guy is actually, threatening to kill this dude. Once again, this guy, the Democratic staffer, if you're white with a right-wing history, he would have, even if he's like bleeding to death, he would have still sided with the black kid stabbing to death than he would that you. But in that case, like it is like actual harm is coming. Maybe you should work up that. In that case, like the courage should be worked up, and maybe you should hopefully find another person or at least 2 other people to help you out here. As these cases like happen like this, there's also a case in France where there was a potential terror attack that was thwarted by 3 Marines. 2 of the guys were Marines who were on vacation. I think one of them was an airman, but we'll just say they're 3 Marines. This also happened in summer of 2015, August 2015. And these 3 guys are traveling, and they see that there's like is a Muslim who's like, racking up an AK-47 or whatever you would call an assault rifle. I'm pretty sure it was an AK. They see him racking it up, and they're like, oh fuck, this guy is going to do something bad. So these 3 guys, physically fit, Marine, like military guys. Looking up, I actually think maybe only 2 of them were service members, but whatever. They're like standard bros, early 20s, physically fit. They played sports. They're like the ideal guys to take this on. So they worked up the courage and like, we're going to stop this guy. And the lead guy, gets in, tackles this guy before he can use the gun. But the terrorist then uses his knife to slice at this guy and stab him. And that guy gets really badly, cut up by that dude. But his 2 friends then come and beat the shit out of the guy. I think they used the gun to like knock him in the face and like restrained him, and were able to solve the situation. Now, think about the situation. Now, all 3 of them were very courageous, and especially the lead guy, who I believe was a Marine, and who got cut up really bad. Now, just think about this situation. It was just the one guy. He goes up, he takes that guy down, but the guy has a weapon on and he slashes him up. Now, not only is the guy not, neutralized, the terrorist not neutralized, but now that guy, has the ability, because there's nobody else coming after him, to fully murder you and to do what else. And the fact that he had his 2 buddies who are also physically fit, playing sports, they're the type of guy, the guys who have the ability to take down another man, the fact that he had those 2 buddies to help him out, they were able to restrain and neutralize that shooter. And sure, he didn't hurt anybody else. Even though one guy, I think even another guy also got cut up in the situation, but not as badly as the first guy. And now, not only are you able to survive due to your two buddies being there with you to take this guy down, but the other train passengers are also survived by a group presence. So it just in an individual case where you know a guy who's able to do what he's able to do, and I think knows his way with weapons, knows how to attack people, knows how to fight. You alone, you may end up like the dude on the DC train 7 years ago who got stabbed to death. I don't think that guy was a trained fighter at all or had any martial skill whatsoever. And that's why some teenager was able to horribly assault and then stab him to death with no resistance. And you do need like other people with you. So in a situation like that, if you're with other guys, friends, and you guys know you guys are physically fit and can take down another man, and you see this guy go up there with a group. But if it's just you alone, even if you could probably still take him down, in the way our society works, it's like it rewards you for looking the other way. And by being a good Samaritan, think about the McMichaels in the Ahmaud Arbery case. Think about Jonathan Pitland in the South Carolina neighborhood case. It punishes you for trying to interfere with a black criminal, especially if he's just goofing off by this. And that's what they would try to claim. So that's what it is. I do think it's something wrong in our society that I'm not saying this is heroic. Like what those three guys did in the French train, that's heroism. That's what we should do. That's what we should expect when we see something wrong. But you have to have like other people with you. You guys have to know like how to do that stuff. And those guys were like Marines, or at least one of them was Marine. Other guys would probably pass through Marine boot camp. They're physically fit. They can take down another man. And unless you have that type of group with you, you're going to have nasty results, and it's not going to go your way. That's unfortunate. So the real unfortunate thing is that a group won't emerge on that train just to take that guy down. And I will say this, like the dude who was recording, it was a black guy who knew he didn't have to worry about the racism charges if he took that guy down, but he knew that guy, if he interfered, that guy was going to fuck him up really bad. And he just kept filming. And it's unfortunate he did that, but unless you're expecting at least two other guys to join in with you to stop this situation, things could go wrong for you. And why are you going to interfere with a stranger? And unfortunately in our society, it's like you just have to care about your narrow circle and avoid unnecessary confrontations with strangers who will likely side with the perpetrator depending on what you've posted about on Twitter. And so that's where it comes from. I don't think it's a good thing, but it's just a practical thing in a real world thing. And I am kind of tired of this pseudo-machism where these like boomers think that they can take down everybody just by telling put up your dukes. And this is how I grew up. And then this black schizo stabs you to death. I guess that sends a lesson. But that's the one question. Now this is actually a statement, not necessarily a question. This is from our French friend that I always butcher his name. He goes by Julien. I think that's the way you pronounce it in French. It's not Julien or Julian, as you would pronounce it, or Julian as we would pronounce it in English. Should just call him Julien, but Julien. I like to add a little bit of the accent there, not be a total yokel. He left some very interesting comments about the last episode about the European New Right. He goes to these conferences, so he knows what is up. So he had some very interesting insight that I want to read for you guys. He's like, "Hi, Scott. I really enjoyed Monday's episode. Carlsbad is an autistic savant, true, and it is always a pleasure to hear him speak. I wanted to share some additional thoughts on the matter as someone who's currently involved in these circles in France, as well as maybe a few corrections. I think it was a bit reductive to present this type of right-wing pan-Europeanism as simply a post-fascist movement emanating from the end of World War II. In my view, the French nonconformists of the 30s, who were key in the founding of the proto-EU, were much more influential and were pushing for a kind of third-way European federalism way before the neo-fascists. So too were some of the German conservative revolutionaries like Stefan George and his circle." I mispronounced Stefan George's name. I think it'd be Stefan Georg, but I'm sure the Europeans are rolling their eyes at hearing my pronunciations. Anyway, back to this. "Who had a much more profound influence on Benoit than Evola and the like. Autistic nitpicking aside, I think the most interesting figure in that the entire movement was without a doubt Jean Yai Lagu, Lagalu, Lagalu. We'll call him Lagalu. I'm pretty sure that's close enough. From the Club de la Hoga. It's the Clock Club. This is great. You're welcome, Europeans, for these new pronunciations. Lagalula, or Galu, Galu, had a prestigious career in public administration, creating both metapolitical and political projects. All mostly successful, was an MP, and managed to reconcile the better ideas of the new right with traditional conservatism. Among other examples, he was one of the main advisors of the Zemmour campaign and was in large part responsible for popularizing the campaign's more identitarian themes. This year, Le Galou's ethno-nationalist think tank, the Iliad Institute, we're not saying it in French, held a conference with over 1,200 people, attended by several mainstream pundits and politicians. I think this sort of figure is probably the kind that should be held as a model among the American and European dissident right currently, seeing as everyone seems to be retreating to a defeatist communitarianism of some sort. And he said it was still a great episode. He just wanted to point this out. And like Galou, is an interesting figure. I think we talked about him previously. He was like a guy who left in the episode. He left to join the National Front and has always been involved in these political circles. He's also somebody who he's friends with Jared Taylor and other Americans. So he's not necessarily a cuck and is like, oh, we don't see race or identity. It's all culture. Some of these Europeans do that, but he doesn't do that. He also added another point. I said, I asked Julian about, what does he think about the identitarians? What is going on with state persecution? How is it going on? And he left this very interesting insight. So he said, it's quite interesting because while France and Europe generally do not have free speech, the regime is much less thorough in its persecution than the United States, provided you follow a few simple rules. Typically, the most that happens is the government finds a bullshit reason to dissolve a group, dissolves it, finds its leader, and that's it. The group will usually reform under a different name that's not too long after. A good example is Generation Identity. After it got dissolved, all the local groups just changed their names and administrative status and just went on with their activities, while its leaders either joined Zemmour's party, a few are congressional candidates, or become e-celebs. We love e-celebs. The progressional consequences are also typically mild, provided you aren't a real activist type. And then he lists some other people. He didn't necessarily want me to name these people, but he said that they are guys who are open about their beliefs in France. And it's like, one's a managing director at a big investment bank. One guy is a prestigious career in the management of a pharma company. And another guy is a VP at JP Morgan. And these are guys who have been involved in Zemmour's campaign and identitarian activities, and they're still able to have very highly prestigious jobs. And I know another person he doesn't list who I have friends with. This guy, or I'm friend of a friend who's in France, who he's written like identitarian books before under his own name, and he works at a corporate law firm. He's like open about his beliefs. He's just it. I mean, this is the nature of France. Of course, and going back to what Julian is saying, of course, that is not to say that there are no professional consequences. I do know a lot of people lost their jobs, and I certainly avoid speaking about politics in the workplace. There can also be real financial consequences if you're a public figure that writes books or who tweets with illegal content. Renaud Camus, for example, is perpetually broke because he gets sued by multiple SPLC-type groups at a time, including the Union of Jewish Students of France, and he names all these other groups every time he says something about Africans. There is also the real possibility of going to jail if you criticize a certain ethno-religious group and talk too much about certain historical events or make dumb calls for violence. Overall, though, I think it's probably safer to be a dissident here than in the States, and I don't think many major figures here would trade places with Nick Fuentes. Other countries in Europe can be much worse, however, Germany mostly, so I can't speak for them. So overall, France is ironically not too bad on that front, though it will inevitably get worse. Back in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, people would be leaders in national street fighting groups and then go on to become ministers in center-right governments. Those were the days, big born in the wrong generation moment. So he says that, and I think that is an interesting point, and I've heard this from a lot of Europeans, is that, you're able to have a normal life by citing like nationalist and identitarian concerns, while in America, even liking a Trump post may ruin your life depending on where you are. I do remember there was a guy who worked at an investment firm I think this was in 2016. He was found out to be donating to Trump's campaign, and they fired him. And there's a bunch of examples of this in the corporate world, where just somebody who's turned out to be a Trump supporter or whatever. And there was Brandon Ike, who was the founder of Mozilla, who got forced out of his own company. It turned out he had donated to causes to ban gay marriage. Once again, he got forced out of his own company because they're like, and this is a long time ago. This is like 10 years ago when this happened, 8 or 10 years ago when this happened. So this is a very different pre-Trump time, and you still had to do this. So there's much more of a thorough cleaning house of stuff where it's like, just being involved in some stuff, or like even what they were going after when people back in the days when Identity Europa and American Identity Movement was around, is like Antifa just like was like finding some guy who was like a member of the group, didn't say anything controversial, and they were getting them fired from their jobs just by belonging to a certain group. And they've done this with even just like Trump supporters, or guys who supported Proud Boys, or even think about the example of those guys like random police officers and other citizens who donated to Kyle Rittenhouse's defense fund, who got fired from their jobs just from funding a guy, just from donating to a defense fund. And yeah, there's way more of the private sector operates to ensure that you can't speak out here politically, because there's going to be there's going to be serious consequences if you do that. Now, there is like a point that he alluded to that I think is much better here, is that due to our libel laws being a lot stricter, and due to the fact that we don't have hate speech laws either, that we are protected from getting these like really horrible lawsuits, even though there is like cases where they're trying to change that. They're trying to create a precedent with the Charlottesville lawsuit and some other things where they're like trying to sue people just for hate speech. But we do have a higher standard for libel and other things and we don't have hate speech laws. So we're unfortunately not getting arrested for talking about demographic replacement, or getting sued for it. And that is one difference that here. But I think when it comes to just being it's probably better for a major figure to exist here, or somebody who's like open about this, rather than in Europe, where it's just like life is hell. And I think even with like this case of like Martin Sellner, who operates in Austria, and I do think this is like a country to country dependent. I think in Germany and Austria, it's way worse for our guys, but it's probably a little bit better in France. But like Martin Sellner, he can't even open a bank account in his country. Now that is happening here, but it's like even to a greater extent in Germany and Austria. And also, Antifa blows up his car. They come and try to storm his apartment, and he faces, state harassment and Antifa harassment. You don't necessarily have that here in America, where like Antifa's coming and like blowing up your car and invading your home or throwing grenades in it, which is something you do have to worry about in Europe, which fortunately we don't have that here yet. I mean, that could change. I mean, with the circumstances. So there is I think France is, depending on the country, I think France, Hungary, most of Eastern Europe is much more open to these ideas, and less like, demanding you get fired for simply, talking about demographic replacement, or saying that like the French people are there's an ethnic identity to France, or saying these like things that should be benign and normally accepted. While here in America, just sharing a Tucker Carlson video may get you fired from your job. So it is like there is which results in more conformity of thought here than it would be in Europe. So I would say that there are some advantages to Europe, and there are some different advantages to America. I would mainly say that the hate speech laws and the stricter libel standard, or stricter standard for libel, or whatever. I don't even know what they're saying. They may be able to sue them under spreading hate, which, I mean, we fortunately don't have that here in Europe. And that does allow for greater freedom to speak in some respects. But then when it comes to like people who also want to live a normal life, it's much harder to live a normal life where you're like, maybe you're operating as running a political website, but then your like day job is being a lawyer or an accountant. I think it's much harder to do that here in America than it is to do that in Europe. Like I couldn't like people always like attack me. It's like, why don't you get a real job? And it's like that. It's like, well, I can't do what I do with a podcast or anything else, and with getting a real job. And like the only way I could even get like a job is like I'd have to change my name. I have to apologize for everything, and then I just get like a low wage like shitty job anyway, where I could lose it at any moment because the SPLC like writes up where I like work. Which there's like several examples of this, like kids who just like abandon politics and they're going to do something else, and like Antifa journalists find out like what they're doing, and then they get fired or their lives ruined. Like there's been a couple people who tried to join the military and they've ditched politics for a long time, but due to the fact that they're politically involved like 3 years ago, they're getting booted from the military for that. So I think that's something very different here in America. So I think France is much better. I would say by all standards in Germany, we're much better, like much freer. I think in like the AfD is now under state surveillance. The Alternative for Deutschland, the Alternative for Germany, their mainstream nationalist party is now under state surveillance and considered a threat to the Constitution. That's a pretty wild thing, and that's like ensuring that they try to even suppress their own normie nationalist party. So that's like makes it much worse. But, there are advantages to Europe. I think also more Europeans fundamentally understand these things, but it's due to the state persecution they fear. And also that, and they're like, I think a lot of their societies are less like messed up. I don't think, there's a ton of problems in Germany and Europe, I think, with a lot of their conformity and their COVID lockdowns and, their real commitment to the human rights, like dogma, like where it's like, oh, human rights requires us to welcome in most migrants. But I mean, their societies are, I think, less messed up than ours. I mean, they're not having mass shootings all the time. They do. They don't walk around their cities and just see trash piled up everywhere. And, they're not having, and their cities are not nearly as dangerous or as unsafe as ours. And they do have a lot much nicer cities. So, and there's a general welfare state that they're able to have that we're not able to have. And I don't even support necessarily having the massive type of European welfare state we have in America that keeps people much more content. And so I think a big difference between Europeans is that maybe the average European more understands this, and a lot of them do understand ethnic differences. Like a German will just say they may be fully committed to immigration and stuff, but they understand what a German is, and they're not going to just say it's like a commitment to human rights. They'll still admit what a German is and know what a German is, even if they're voting for like the socialists. But not all Germans, but there's a lot of them. While like even like the most far right American who's like maybe even a big Tucker fan will still believe that like diversity is our strength and anyone can be an American and there's no such thing as American ethnicity or American people, even for the far right people. And I think that's like a big difference between us. But the one thing is that more Americans see that there's something wrong and want to do something about it. Well, I think a lot of Europeans, France accepted and a few other places accepted, but primarily thinking about the Germanic countries and the UK. Well, the UK is more messed up, but primarily thinking about Germany and some of the other countries, maybe the Low Countries, that they're much more complacent and just willing to accept the way things are, even though they know that things are going wrong, because generally their day-to-day life is fine. They're not interacting with horrors unimaginable on a regular basis like you might in America, no matter where you live. So I think that is like a big difference. But in some ways, the hate, I know I'm carrying on a little bit too long. My last thought is, some ways the hate speech laws do play to a benefit in that it does make people better check their optics. Not that I support hate speech laws because they would be used liberally here. And they're used liberally even in France, where like Marine Le Pen and others who just say mainstream, like benign things get charged with it. But it does make people not go full idiot. Some people want to go here in America. So that's a part of the thought. More thoughts on that in the future, but I think that was a great comment and statements from Juliana. I want to share that. But that's it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. We're going to have a terrific, high-flying IQ supplement later this week and another great episode next week. So until next time, stay respected.